Hey, good morning, Royal High School Woodshop. Today, we're going to introduce a really cool topic that has to do with putting finish on a product. We're going to go take a field trip. We're going to do some learning about the techniques used in it, and then we're going to apply it to this conifer tree or Christmas tree that we are making. So, without further ado, let's go take a look at distressed finishing. Our topic today is distressed finishes, and distressed finishes take a lot of work and a lot of planning, just like any other finish that we would put on a project. However, there's a big difference. Distressed finishes look old when in fact they're really new. Some people want a brand new looking kitchen or a brand new looking piece of furniture. Others want their furniture to look old. They want it to blend into a house or other furniture that already exists, and they want it to look like it's antique. So that's a process that can be done by the woodworker. Today we're going to learn about that, and we're going to learn some of the techniques that are used in distressing a finish and making a finish look old when in fact it's new. So one of the easiest types of finish to learn about distressed finishing with is paint. Our project that we're working on right now lends itself very well to that. So we're going to learn about distressed finishing with a painted project, but distressed finishes can be done with a clear coat, a clear finish as well. To see up close and personal a really good example of distressed finishes, we're going to go to an actual business that sells cabinets, and we're going to take a look at a brand new set of cabinets. But when we look at them, we'll see they look really old. They look like they are worn out, and that just tells us the people that built those cabinets did a really great job of distressing the finish and making it look antique. All right, well, here we are at WDC Kitchen and Bath Center in Moore Park, and we're going to go look at an actual example of distressed cabinets. Come on, let's go take a look. All right, well, here we are standing in WDC, and this is a beautiful example of some cabinets that are brand new, very expensive cabinets, and yet they look really old. This is what distressed cabinetry or distressed finishing can do for a set of cabinets. So let me bring you in close and show you some up-close detail of these cabinets. All right, well, I can see right here how the corners have been sanded off to look like they're worn out. These are great examples of that right here on this lower or this upper set of cabinets. Right, so I don't know if you can see this, but when I look right here on these cabinets, here, there, I'm seeing different marks, dents in the wood. Those were put there using distressed cabinet techniques. I'm seeing lots of wood through the finish. That means somebody has sanded off the corners to make it look like this is well worn. I'm seeing lots of marks on here, dents across here, probably put on by a chain. Again, more marks. I'm seeing the edges of things sanded off. This cabinet here, when I look at this, I see lots of dents in it. Those are put there by chains. Along with some of the sanded off edges here, I'm also noticing dents in the wood. Up here on the top, it's hard to see, but I see some little black marks. That would be fly marks that are put there with paint.
But you can buy additional.
Again, some dents, sanding, and also fly marks put in there with black paint. So we've seen some beautiful cabinets, and this is exactly the same kinds of detailing that we're going to learn about and that we're going to be doing on the conifer tree or the Christmas tree that you're going to be making. So now it's time to head back over to the classroom and put this all into practice. Well, hello, Royal High School Woodshop. It's Mr. Sorensen, and it's a beautiful January morning. Great day out after all that rain. So today I want to show you how we're going to paint the conifer tree or the Christmas tree, and let you see the concept of distressed finishing. So here is my workstation, and I have everything I need to put a finish on one of the Christmas trees. To begin with, we want to make sure that if you're working at one of the benches at school, you have some paper out, cut, and put down on the table surface in front of you. That's just good protocol, whether you're in somebody's kitchen working or in their house working on doing finish, trim. You always want to make sure that when messy stuff like glue or paint is involved, finishes are involved, that you take care to protect the area around where you're working. And as you saw, I'm just putting some paint on some of these pieces. Now, you probably noticed that, hey, Mr. Sorensen, I think you were putting red paint on that little piece of wood, but our tree is going to be green. So what we're looking at here as well is something called a distressed finish, and that is taking something that's brand new and making it look like it's antique or very old. And so I'm going to show you a lot of the ways that we go about doing that, one of which is that, for example, if your family has things made out of barn wood, oftentimes that barn was painted many times before the barn wood made it into the coffee table or into the wainscoting or the project that you have it in at your house. So as it's sanded and kind of made ready for its current job, a lot of times you can see the different layers of paint through the finish. And so that one of the primary ways that we put a distressed finish on a project is by putting multiple colors of paint on it before we sand through our outer coat. And when we sand through our outer coat, it's going to let those other coats show through, and it's going to give somebody the impression that this had been painted many times before, that this is old and it had been painted many times before. Now, some of the other tools that we'll use are a sanding block. What's in here is a chain, a hammer, and a drill. So we'll use those as well as we talk about distressing the pieces of wood so they look antique. Now our main goal is going to be to paint that. So as you can see, I've got some paints here, and I'm going to put the paints in the little cups that are available at the front of the room. The main color that we're going to put on there is obviously green, and you can pick whatever shade of green you want to use. But if you would like to, you can put some different colors on some of the pieces to start out and let them dry, and then come back over the top of those colors with the green. And then even if I don't do a nice job of totally covering the piece of wood, I just allow some of that red or yellow or other color to show through. It's gonna give it the hint of, boy, that looks old. It looks like this has been painted prior to the current coat of paint. And so all of that gives what looks like an antique finish or a distressed finish. One of the first things I want to do with all of my pieces is I noticed that the ends and edges of each of these pieces is very square. Now, if this is antique, it won't be square. It will be worn off from ages and ages of taking it in and out of a box to put it out as a decoration at Christmas time. So what happens with a piece of wood as it's used over and over and over again is that the edges, the corners get knocked off from dropping or whatever. So I'm just going to go like that and lightly sand. And I primarily want to sand the upward surface, the top surface. I can do it on both if I want to, but I'm going to sand each of the pieces a little bit just to knock off the edges and the corners and to make it look like it's been dropped. And again, you can do this. We'll come back and sand it again later as well. But so I'm going to start a pile over here of all the pieces that I have sanded. So I remember that, oh, I've already done those. I don't want to be, there's a lot of pieces here to sand, so I don't want to sand them multiple times. All right, well, what I'm going to do here for a few minutes is sand these. And so I'll keep doing that. You sand yours. Make sure if there's any splinters from your cuts that you get that off as well. And then I will come back and join you again in a few minutes. Well, a lot of my sanding is now done. So let me show you a few additional techniques that we want to work on before we start to paint the pieces. So in a distressed finish, after you've sanded, the next thing you want to do is you want to create damage on the wood. And the purpose of that is to simulate the wear and tear of years of use. So that's where we're going to bring in the drill, the chain, and the hammer. So now I'm going to take each of the pieces and I'm going to use the side that's been sanded, and I'm just going to use both the claw and the head of the hammer to put a few marks on it, some dents that just look like maybe it had been dropped. Somebody, right, the piece of wood could have been stepped on before it was made into the project. Something like that. Anyway, I want to just put a little bit of damage. I want to simulate a little wear and tear on each of the pieces. Now, I don't want to do too much. If I just destroy each piece of the project, by the time it's done, it's just going to look like a mess. It's not going to look right. So this takes good judgment. I want to put a little bit of damage. And I may not even do it on all the pieces. I may only do it on, let's say, half of them. Maybe I only do it on a quarter of them. But that's going to take time just to get to know what makes it look the most authentic. All right, so that's the use of the hammer and damaging the piece of wood. Another way I can put damage on a piece of wood, and we saw this at the DWC cabinet shop, is that's where we could use the piece of chain. Now, I'm not really set up for this, especially in this small project, but I can take the chain and just hit the piece of wood. When I do that, I can see little marks left on the wood. They just look like, who knows what they are. They're very nondescript, but they're damage to the wood, which is exactly what makes this look distressed. You can also put the chain in a canvas bag and then just drop or hit the pieces of wood with that canvas bag, right? But I'm just going to take the chain and do that. I'm going to just hit each of the pieces a few times with that. So that would be using the chain to damage or distress the wood as well. Another place that I can add some wear and tear, in this case it's less about wear and tear, but it's simulating another thing that we see in old antique furniture, is the drill. Now you might say, hey, Mr. Sorensen, what do you drill holes in the board for? How does that help this look antique? Well, over time, usually what will happen is that a piece of wood that was milled and brought in and built into a piece of furniture, there may have been beetles, or it's not so much termites. Termites would do a much bigger hole and probably far more damage, but usually beetles or worms of some kind that are in the wood, they might be in there from when the wood was harvested, but over time they'll slowly eat their way through the board, and sometimes they'll pop their head out through the surface of the board. So wormholes or beetle holes are a hallmark of distressed finishes. Now, again, I don't want to put 2 holes in every single piece. That's not going to look distressed. That's going to look very uniform, like somebody drilled holes in this board. But if I just put 3 or 4 in the whole tree, that is going to look like, hey, look, there's a beetle hole or a wormhole in that piece of wood. And the beetle hole or the wormhole isn't going to go straight through the board. It's going to be at random and odd angles. That also would signal to me, oh, this was a beetle that kind of ate its way through the board and ate it out the side, right? So I'm going to put my drill in, and I just want to drill at sort of a random angle a hole through the board. Now you can do this at school with your handheld drill. That's fine. That works perfectly. And again, I'm not going to do this on every piece. I'm only going to do it on a couple of them. And when I drill holes into the pieces of wood to simulate a worm or a beetle hole, I also want to be careful to use the right size drill bit. They're generally going to be on the very small side. They're not going to be giant holes. If I drill giant holes, it's going to look like somebody drilled a giant hole. Beetle holes or bug holes tend to be very small. So we're talking about 3/32 and a 16th. Small holes is what simulates bug or beetle activity. Well, I'm finished with the damage of all the pieces. So now let's go on and look at the painting steps. I'm ready to start painting. When I do that, first of all, it's important that I have some paper underneath whatever it is I'm working on. So a bench top, so that I can constrain the mess, keep from making a big mess. If I'm working in somebody's house, doing cabinets or finish work, the same thing would be true. Now you notice there's a lot of different colors of paint that I have here, and yet I'm doing a Christmas tree. Well, what are all these other paints for? So as we start painting our project, one of the things about a distressed finish is, especially with paint, is that oftentimes it will look like that this is an old piece of wood and there are several layers of paint on it. When you sand it, you break through one color into another color, and it looks like, oh, this piece of wood has been painted multiple times. How do I simulate that? This might be like an old piece of barnwood. So one of the ways I do that is I put other colors on underneath my final coat. So it could be yellow, it could be red. In this case, I'm going to do red or white. And I'm just going to put these colors on underneath. So I'm going to do this on a handful of the sticks. I'm not going to do it on every single one, but I'm going to pre-paint some of these pieces with other colors like red or yellow or white, so that when I do my final coat of green, you see multiple layers of color and it looks like an old piece of barnwood, and maybe this had been painted several times previous to its current state of affairs. All right, so I'll do that with a couple of them. Now, the other thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to go ahead and paint all of these pieces now green. I have several shades of green here that you can use, and I want to paint both the top and the bottom. I'm going to do most of my distress work on the top that is seen, but I do want the bottom coated as well. And I'm going to make sure I just get a nice coat of paint on here. If the paint doesn't coat very well on the first coat, I can always come back and put a second coat on it. And actually it won't necessarily matter, because eventually we'll sand through a lot of it or some of it, and it's gonna, you'll see some of the wood right through our paint job. If I use a variety of color, that's okay, because the different colors just adds a lot of creativity and depth to the Christmas tree. So in this case, I have a dark paint as well as a light paint. And I'm just setting these on a little piece of wood to dry so they don't get stuck to my paper. Now here's one of the red ones that's dry. And so now I'll come back and I'll just go ahead and paint right over that. And let me show it to you. I can go like that, and you can see how I'm leaving some of the red showing through. Let me show you one that's been completely finished and dry. Look at how we can see the red color in there in the midst of the green. That faint hint of red in there misleads somebody. It makes somebody think that this board has been painted several times when in fact it hasn't. It's just a process of distress finishing. There's another one. And again, you can just see this faint hint of red through the sanding that I've done. And so it just kind of makes it look like, oh, that paint piece has been painted multiple times. All right, well, I have a bunch of pieces that I need to paint green. So I'm gonna go ahead and do that. I'm gonna paint these pieces green, and then I'll come back and we will wrap up our distress finishing video. So I'm done with the painting. As I finish that up, I do want to point out, because I kind of overlooked ever say anything about it, the tree trunk. The tree trunk gets painted the same way we would do everything else. I might put some undercoats of different colors on it and then come back and paint it brown. When it's dry, I'm gonna sand through it. The key now in moving on to this next step is that to do this final step with the distress finish, I need to make sure that all of this paint is dry. If I paint it and then go right to this final step, which is sanding, I'm gonna make a giant mess, and I'm not gonna end up with a very good looking product. So after everything is fully dry, and that might just mean go ahead and wait till the next day, now I'm gonna come back with my sandpaper and my sanding block, and just like we saw in those cabinets at the DWC, I want to start sanding through the paint, especially on corners and edges. And I want those edges to show through. This is really what starts to give these pieces the appearance of being worn. Having been here a long time, people have dropped it, they've bumped it, it's rubbed on things, and some of the finish is starting to come off. Now, I'm not going to do this sanding on the bottom where we don't see any of it. I'm only doing it on the top side of each of the pieces. I don't want to sand too much. I don't want to sand the whole painted surface off of there. So just enough that it looks a little bit worn, and that looks good. I'll move on to the next one. Well, I have quite a few more of these that I need to sand. So let me go ahead and do that. I'll come back and join you again when I'm done with these and finish sanding them. And then we will do the last step in the distress process, and we'll be ready to go and actually assemble the Christmas tree. So when we were at the cabinet store, I mentioned the concept of fly spots, and that's exactly what we're going to do here. We're going to simulate fly spots. So this is one additional way that we distress or antique a piece of furniture or a project. And for this, the tool I'm going to use for this is the common everyday toothbrush. Okay, so what I want to do here is, and again, this is like all the other damage that I've done to my project. I don't want to do too much. If I do too much, it doesn't look right. So I'm going to take my toothbrush. I'm going to put a little bit of paint on it, and then I'm just going to actually pull the bristles of the toothbrush back and let them go. And I'm going to flick little spots of paint onto the project. And I don't want too much here, right? I don't want too much, just 1 or 2 little spots on each of, or a few of the pieces of green is going to look great. So now that the paint has been sanded off on each of them, I'm going to come back now and flick some little spots of paint on it. You may want the paint to be a little wetter, right? So if the paint is kind of stiff, the acrylic paint is stiff, you're going to have to water it down a little bit so that when you flick the tines of the toothbrush, little drops of water will actually come off. And fly spots are generally either white or black. So that's the 2 colors you want to use for fly spots. All right, and so I can see some really tiny little spots on there. That's great. I'm going to move to the next piece. Oh, I see some spots on there. Now this is kind of messy. I'm going to get the paint on me, so I just need to be careful. And I'm going to show you, let me see if I can show you a good close-up of that. You can see there on that, see the fly spots, see all the little black spots. That's exactly how we simulate the fly spots. And you can see in there, in some of the in some of the surfaces where I've sanded, you can see the red showing through. So you've got a green board with red showing through. That's simulating the different layers of paint on this old piece of wood. All right, so what I'm going to do here is just, I'm going to lay out 4 or 5 pieces of my project. I could lay out all of them. And I'm going to take my toothbrush. I don't want too much. I don't want goops and globs of paint on there. And I'm just going to that looks great. A few little spots on each piece, and I'm going to slide those aside and do the next bunch. And I'm just going to go through the process of doing that with each of the pieces, and then I'll come back and meet you, and we'll finish up. All right, well, that looks pretty good. My pieces of green material now look like they have little fly spots all over them. So we're done with the distress process. You've now seen all of the different techniques that can be used to distress the wood. We can put a clear finish over the top of this when we're done if we want to, but the wood now has the features that we intended. All of these pieces of wood look really old. They look like they came from a barn somewhere or some other thing that was created, and then we took the pieces and repurposed them for something else. That's a distressed or antique finish. So now let's go on back to the creating the Christmas tree or the conifer tree video, and I'll show you how to assemble all of these pieces into the final project.